When I read Chloe Hayden's book, Different Not Less, one of the early pages that grabbed me was where she describes her first week of school. She calls it the first week of hell, and I found it really heartbreaking. And she goes on to talk about a game plan, which I will too. But I found it really heartbreaking because I know children who would say the same. And I think when we are considering how we can support that positive school experience from primary into high school, into secondary school, it's so important that we don't dismiss or deny or try and placate the primary school experience, which, if it's been a positive one, that is all the better, because that gives us something very firm to build on. And of course, for many of our children, building on what they know, building on familiarity, is a really good starting point to success. It's really helpful to think about what is it that actually went well when our children were attending primary school, and what is it that they found difficult, and they can be our really positive starting points. And you'll know by now that I'm going to talk about how we can help practically, because we can't argue that actually all of the research continues to point to, and has throughout my whole career, the idea that actually for many neurotypical people, visual support is what we turn to in times of stress. It's where we go when we want to find something out. We look for clues and we look for ways of gaining information in order to achieve something. If we're sensory overloaded, the first thing we do is manage our environment. So if we're lost, we might turn down the radio in the car and put on the sat nav. We might ask people to be quiet to support our success in that transition. And so it's no different for our neurodivergent young people who are having to cope with that transition of going to high school. And we know that any change for many of our children draws on those areas of their brain that are challenging. It's demanding them to use their memory recall for moving forward on something. It's demanding them to be able to predict what needs to come next or what needs to happen next. It draws on skills of time management, and all of these areas can be very successful for our neurodivergent young people, so long as we put the right things in place to help them and to support them. So reminding our children of what's going to be the same is really important, and we can do that by talking about things like, what should we have for breakfast? So planning ahead and preparing for that first day at school by almost having a practice and running through that process beforehand. Thinking about the sensory processing around uniforms and how that might feel different, whether we're going to be wearing buttoned shirts that we haven't worn before, and having a practice with those so that we're really mindful of our sensory experience and how we can support that. Thinking about our bag that we're going to take to school, can we consider perhaps packing that beforehand and having a practice? Thinking, is there something that we could take with us that would just be helpful? I know one young man who actually was helping on the farm through the whole of the holidays, and when he used to come home from primary school, the first thing he would do is go and help his dad on the farm. And this is not because I live in Yorkshire. This is just a true story about a little boy that helped him get through the whole new experience of primary into high school. And his parents talked about doing lots of reminders of things that will still happen, things that will remain the same. And so in order to help him to remember that when he came home, he'll be helping back out on the farm, he just had a little sheep motif, and his parents just sewed it onto the inside of his school trouser pocket. and no one even knew it was there other than him. But what it meant was that when he put his hand in his pocket, he had that reminder that when he came home from school, that whole process would still be the same. And of course, Gary Mezibov, a real guru in the world of neurodiversity, talks about the fact that actually it's really important. And Ed Hallowell, he talks about the fact as well that actually that routine and that structure and that familiarity can be really helpful and supportive for our neurodivergent young people. So the more we can buy into that, then the better it can be. And one of the ways we can buy into that is to support our young people in planning ahead about their experience and what that's likely to be for a high school day. So talking about changes of rooms and working on that, breaking off a task, which for some of our young people can be really difficult, whereas for others staying on task can be more challenging. So it's about knowing our children as well and thinking, how can we support them in changing from one task to another, or support them in remaining focused on those tasks. And using things like colour code systems to time how long we can stay doing something can be really helpful. So not just putting a schedule in place, and this might be a little bit too detailed for your children, or it might be helpful. So thinking we need to get as much information from school as we can, so we can think in terms of putting who's going to be in school, who's going to be supporting us, and then having our timetable and actually drawing out a timetable at home and doing one at home just as a bit of fun and a bit of a practice can be really helpful. But in the school timetable, if we colour code things, lots of our young people find that really positive way to work. So it might be, for example, that we've got our library on our timetable in our planner just outlined in green. So everything that we might need for the library, so our wallets and our books, might just have a green sticker on them. Or for maths or for English, whichever topic it is, if we have the outline on the timetable in that colour, and then we colour code that particular wallet and put in the books for that particular subject, can be really helpful. And so another sort of good positive starting point might be to beforehand find out if there's anyone close by who's going to be walking in that direction to school or travelling on the school bus, and see if we can sort of have a play day and set up a meet so that they've got someone to actually go with and to have that support in that whole transition. And also marking out timings, so using a clock face and sectioning out on the clock face in colour or just shading it out, the idea of actually how long you are actually in school. And for some children that can be a real reassurance, and it can reduce their anxieties about that new experience and that change in the way of how things are going to happen. Talking about all the things that many of the children that have transitioned to high school just know. So talking about the fact that it won't necessarily be all the same children in each of their classes, that actually they're not going to, often we talk about the changes of each room, but we don't talk about the fact that there's going to be different people in each of those rooms. And of course, doing as much communication with school as we can in terms of seating plans and consistency, where we can manage to maintain some consistency, because we want that experience to hopefully be a positive one. And so the more understanding we can put in place before our children actually have to go through that physical experience, then the better it's going to be. I think shopping beforehand and planning snacks that we're going to have after school, thinking in terms of food, what's lunchtime going to look like? How will that work? And I know one young man who actually this looks quite complex, but it was just a system of helping him to understand that the green areas were an okay way to spend dinner money. The blue areas were if it was his permission, but the red areas, because he had other children asking him to use his credit to pay for their dinners. So thinking in terms of how we can support our children in understanding the routines and working well with those routines. So just to summarise, we're going to think about the visuals we can put in place, colour coding topics, understanding our sensory experiences around perhaps uniforms and bells and changes, and thinking in terms of how we can support understanding the surrounding information that many children just know, like the different people in the classrooms, how lunchtime rolls, how break times work. So I really wish your children well and hope that they have a positive experience in their transition to high school.